books that I read for the last 40 years, and today I have my special guest. She's the author of the book Dandelion, a memoir in essays, none other than Miss Danielle Bainbridge.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Welcome, Miss Danielle on Book One Wonder Bee, and can you please introduce more about yourself that I miss?
Yeah, so my name is Danielle Bainbridge. I'm an author and college professor, as well as a creative writer from Chicago, Illinois. So I teach at Northwestern in the departments of theater, Black Studies, and performance studies. And I teach classes mainly on Black history and culture, Black theater, with a special focus on the US South and the English speaking Caribbean. I also am the author of Dandelion, a Memoir and Essays, which is a book of essays about living with bipolar depression and the intersections of gender, identity, and race in this country. And then outside of that, I've also published an academic book called Currencies of Cruelty: Slavery, Freak Shows, and the Performance Archive, which is about 19th century performers, Black people who were born with disabilities and born into slavery and made to perform in sideshows and freak shows. So that's just a little bit about me.
And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world, Miss Danielle. Thank you. The dandelion is often classified as a stubborn invasive weed, yet it's also a medicinal, deep rooted, and resilient. When you sat down to write, which aspect of dandelion come first, the resilience or the invasiveness? Which one you were more afraid to claim?
Yeah, so Dandelion is actually a childhood nickname that the people in my family gave me when I was very young. Now that the book has come out, there's been a little wondering if it was my father who gave me the nickname or my aunt who gave me the nickname, but it's always been my childhood nickname in the family. And I think the duality, as you said, of the dandelion is what really inspired me to name the book after that. Um, I think for me, the sort of resilient nature of the dandelion is the thing that really drew me to that title. That it could be something that is both beautiful, resilient, strong, but also, something that could be seen as negative in other contexts. And I think, I wanted to capture that duality as I explored the themes of living with bipolar depression um, in this book.
Very well said, Miss Danielle. A dandelion disperse its seeds whether we are ready or not. How much control do you feel you had over the dispersal of these memories onto the page, and how much felt involuntary, like wind simply took them?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great question. I think in some ways I felt a lot of ownership over these stories because they're so personal, and also because it was something that I worked on for a very long time. I was working on these essays for about 10 years before I, advanced to publication. And I think the real moment where I felt like I didn't have control over how the stories were dispersed was when it was published, because at that point it's let out into the world and everyone has to interact with it in its own way, and you don't have control over how people interpret it or how they receive it or what's being said about it, etc. But I think when I was writing, I felt a lot of control because I was able to control what parts of my memories I shared, what parts I held on to for myself. But then, once it was published, that's when I started to feel uh, that sense of more dispersed, um, you know, access.
Certainly, Ms. Danielle, a linear memoir often implies a clean arc of healing. By choosing the essay form fragmented, circular, or revisiting moments from different angles, were you making a statement about nature of memory or the nature of recovery itself?
Mm, that's another great question. I think it was more about the nature of memory, but also in some ways about the nature of recovery. But really, it's about the nature of memory. I find that, I have two siblings, I have parents, we all were living in the same household. And sometimes I'll recall a story and maybe they don't remember it at all or they remember it very differently. And I think that memory in and of itself is fragmentary. It comes and goes, it's elastic, certain things resonate with certain people over others. And so I wanted this form of the memoir to reflect that. I think, the nature of healing is also, piecemeal and fragmentary. And I think that is also something that is reflected in the form of the essay, and the way that the story is untold. The book is not a story of uh, you know, healing and redemption in the sense that everything by the end is resolved and cleanly tied up and neatly woven together. It really tells a story of kind of ongoing self-evaluation and struggle that I think is important to put out there when talking about mental health.
Interesting. Miss Danielle, let's talk the gaps and the silence. In a traditional narrative, you have to fill in the gaps. In an easy collection, you are allowed to leave the gaps empty. Where in this book did you make conscious choice to leave white spaces, literal or metaphorical, rather than explain yourself?
Mm. Yeah, I'd say the white spaces that exist in the book are largely around other people. I do a lot to anonymize or not bring up people in my life in ways that were harmful to them. I mean, I wasn't necessarily interested in portraying everything as always perfect and hunky dory, etc. But I also was really committed to the idea that this was not a book about, settling a score or revenge or anything like that. This was about a personal story and a personal journey that I took, with myself. And I didn't want the idea that I was, evaluating other people or being an armchair therapist to kind of take over the book. And so I left a lot of absence there, to focus on myself and my own narrative. But ultimately, I think that was deliberate, not only to maintain the relationships in my life, for obvious reasons, but also because it wasn't the heart of what I wanted this book to do.
Very well said, Miss Danielle. So, how do you decide where to place these essays if they are not chronological? What is the emotional or thematic through line that dictated which essays followed which?
Mm. Yeah, I think the organizational through line was really emotional. I thought, okay, how is information being revealed to the reader, and how is that revelation taking us through the story? So I was on a writer's residency when I was finishing kind of one of the final drafts of the book, and I made little index cards with each title of each essay and I spread them across the floor and I just kept rearranging them and shuffling them and rearranging them until it was in an order that kind of made sense to me thematically. A lot of the early stories are really focused around childhood, and then it kind of moves into stories about my young adulthood and my struggles with mental illness. And, it kind of evolves in different phases. And then there's one essay that was quite long. I could only say thank you that I broke into three parts in the revision process before publication, and then put that at different signposts throughout the book. But yeah, the order really came from thinking about how I organically wanted the information to be told and how I wanted readers to interpret the book.
Miss Danielle, certain images reappear across multiple essays. What is the intentional weaving, or did you discover only in revision that you were haunted by the same symbols?
Mm. Yeah, I think repetition is a way of making sense of things sometimes. We repeat things and revisit them and turn back to them in order to make sense of them for ourselves. And I think it was unintentional, honestly, at the onset that things were being repeated throughout the various essays because they were written as individual pieces, even with when I decided I had a sort of desire to put them into a collection and into conversation with each other, they still were written separate from each other. But I think one of the things that is fascinating in this whole process is that I learned things about myself from writing the book. I learned things about my own thought process and about how I interpret things and how I, hold on to things or let things go or what kind of things resonate with me. And the repetition, yeah, came up kind of coincidentally. And then it was in the revision process that I was like, oh, I keep returning to the theme of the dandelion, or I keep returning to the themes of family or race, or, I was seeing the connections as I finished the book. But in the first push, I definitely was more interested in just letting the essays work on their own and then seeing what happened. Oh, I'm sorry. I think you're on mute.
Thank you for that. So let's talk
Mhm.
about the witness and the participant, Miss Danielle. There are two versions of you in this book: the you who lived through these moments, and the you writing about them decades later. Which voice was harder to trust?
Mm. I think the participant is probably the harder voice to trust, the person who lived through these experiences and lived through these challenges, just because they were moments of psychiatric dysregulation for me and moments where my thought process was different. It was, experiencing mania or experiencing different kinds of mental health challenges um, really changed my perspective, but it also was hard emotionally to revisit those moments and to revisit those challenges. I think as a witness, there's a way that you could stand at a distance and look back on experience and say, oh, this is the lesson that I learned. These are the things that happened, and this is, the outcome. But as, the person living in the moment of it, there really is no distance between you and the experience. It's just happening to you. And I think that was harder to really face and reconcile than it was to look back on the experiences and reflect.
So there is an inherent power shift when a child becomes the activist of the parent. How do you navigate the tension between honoring your family's privacy and honoring the integrity of the truth you needed to tell?
Mm. That's a great question. I think I often say when I told my family that I was writing a memoir, they had the reaction that many people would have, which is kind of happy for me, but also slightly nervous. I think a lot of times memoir is viewed as, you're going to settle old scores and you're going to bring up old family drama and you're going to, embarrass people, reveal things. And I had to reassure them that I was like, that's just not my aim. I have a very good relationship with the members of my family. I love them very sincerely. I had no desire to, embarrass them or expose them in any sort of way. But I also was very clear that this is a story of my life, and the things that happened to me and the things that happen in my life belong to me. And so it was important to balance those two things, what belongs to me and what maybe doesn't belong to me, in terms of story. And I think ultimately I struck a balance between bringing people up, mentioning them, and also withholding things that were not mine to tell. If there was ever, like, this is not the book to read if you're interested in learning family secrets, because I really don't get into any of that sort of thing. But it is a book to read if you're into introspection and thinking about, your own subject position and your own relationship to mental health. But yeah, it was definitely a series of conversations with family, but it was also them trusting me and my judgment that I would, honor our collective story in the book.
Miss Danielle, dandelions grow in the cracks of perfect lawns. They are often considered unsightly. Was there particularly easy or memory you almost buried because it felt too witty to belong in a proper book?
Mm. Yeah, I think some of the essays that were quite challenging to write, like A Dirge for Girlhood or The Hospital, The Spit in My Mouth Heals the Wound on My Tongue, those were very personal essays about trauma. Specifically, A Dirge for Girlhood is about gender based trauma and kind of everyday violence. And, The Hospital is about being hospitalized in my early 20s for a psych hold. And I think those things felt hard to go back to and to think about. But it also felt that if I didn't include them, that I wasn't being fully honest in my own story. Because there was a part of me that thought, oh, this is like, you're mining into this trauma, you're going into these really dark places. But other parts of me felt like, well, that's part of the story. And I think early in the collection, I say, we're not looking for, like, don't read this book if you're looking for like an inciting incident or something that is the root cause of my mental health challenges, because there really isn't one. There wasn't a singular instance in my life where I said, this is now the point at which things went wrong or things changed. But it's more just the everydayness of dealing with these struggles, dealing with these challenges that I think I was negotiating through. And I think that those two essays were probably the hardest and maybe weediest or thorniest to write for those reasons.
Very well said, Miss Danielle. So, as an author, what are your short term and long term goals?
My short term and long term goals. Yeah. I think my short term goals are right now I'm working on a novel. So I'm hopeful to finish that and publish that. And I'm also working on another academic book. So I'm hopeful to keep working on those. And then long term, I would love to publish just more books. I make media work and short films. I'd love to make more of those. I think of myself as having very much like a maker's or a creator's personality. I love to make stuff. I like to tinker. I love to. I mean, I paint. I do all sorts of things badly. Granted, I don't paint well, so I'm not gonna be selling those paintings anytime soon. But I do like to create things for the joy of creation. And I think my long term goal as a writer is have to hold on to that and to always have that in my life, that creation and that desire to make things and to make things hopefully better for other people.
Good luck to your goals and looking forward for more success, Miss Danielle. So, what will be your piece of advice for those people that want to be like you?
I would say my best piece of advice for people who are creative and who want to make things right, whatever it may be, would be to find whatever sort of pattern or routine works for you. Because I used to be a writer who very much waited for like inspiration. I had to wait till the mood struck me and then I could write. But now I have, my writing habits and my writing routine. I have my weekly writing group. I have, time set aside each day to work on things. And I think consistency is the greatest gift you can give yourself as a creative. One, because it gives you so much joy and pleasure to have a consistent part of your life that's reserved for creation. But also, I think it's the way to get things done and to put them out into the world and to share them with people because the world needs especially now the world needs more stories of positive things and uplifting things, and more stories that speak across difference.
Yes, people, consistency is the key. Thank you for that advice, Miss Danielle. And can you please recommend a book or books that influence your journey?
Mm, that influenced my journey. I would say a book that I always return to that was really influential for me was Sula by Toni Morrison. And then a more recent read of something that I really just enjoyed and really loved, maybe Somebody's Daughter by Ashley C. Ford. Those are two books that I really adore.
But recommended books, Miss Danielle.
Hi, I think you're on mute again.
Yes, thank you for saying that.
Mhm.
And thank you for the recommended books, Miss Danielle. And let's talk about the reader's harvest. Readers will inevitably graft their own childhoods into your story. So, what is the most surprising or piercing interpretation someone has brought back to you about what your own story really means?
Mm. That's really interesting. I find that whenever I've shared this work, so like gone to bookstores or shared a reading or had a an event around Dandelion, people tend to share very personal things with me about, I have a family member who has, a chronic mental illness, or I have, a mental illness that I'm struggling with, or depression I'm struggling with, or or some other thing that's going on in my life. And I think ultimately, what's been really wonderful about that sharing is that it makes people feel less alone. And I think that that's been really, really important for me and important for audiences who've been interpreting the book and reading the book, is that, sometimes I'm taken aback by the personal things people share, but I'm also really honored that people trust me with that sort of vulnerability and with their stories. So, yeah, I think it's the personal stories that people share with me that have felt the most meaningful as I've been pushing, promoting the book.
Let's talk about the body of work, Ms. Danielle. A dandelion is a perennial. It comes back every year. Do you feel you have a exorcist this particular story, or do you suspect you will be writing around these same themes for the rest of your career?
That's a good question. I think in some ways, this book is kind of the book of my 20s, because so much of my 20s was kind of marked with um, thinking about mental health and dealing with mental health challenges. But in other ways, the next kind of thing I'm thinking about and the essays I'm writing are more about like living with physical illness and what does that feel like and what does that mean. So similar themes in some ways but different in others. Just kind of more broadly, the last several years of my life have really been marked by a lot of elder care for people in my immediate and extended family. And it's really brought up a lot of feelings for me as I see the people who raised me and loved me as a child get older and also have challenges, like physical challenges. And I think, the themes of health and wellness and what does it mean to be ill will always be in my work in some way, because those are things that I'm very interested in. But I don't know if I'll be writing another book on mental health anytime soon. I might be writing one more related to the body and physical illness in the near future, though.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Danielle. But before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people, because my abstract essay is already in sixth season, abstract poetry in third season, and of course my book 101 review in sixth season too, comedy 101 in its fourth season, and food 101 in sixth season as well, geography 101, love letters, movie 101 review, music 101, our fifth season, science 101, sex 101 and fourth season, spiritual awakening, trivia 101, law 101, mental health 101, motivation 101, entrepreneurship 101, and of course my Bible verses 101 are my baby podcasts. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcast. So, Miss Danielle, if the protagonist of the final essay in the book sat down to read the first essay, what do you think she would feel? Pity, tenderness, or recognition?
Mm. I think she would feel empathy for the writer of the first essay, because some in some ways the first essay, the introduction, is really a invitation to the reader to open the book, to spend time with it, and to think about it. But the final essay, I think, is someone who has come to terms with her illness and herself, and has empathy for her younger self.
So, Miss Danielle, again, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world through your book. So, can you please invite our listeners to support Dandelion or anything you want to promote on Book 101?
Yeah. So you can find me at Quirky Professor underscore on Instagram. You could also find me on Blue Sky, um, at Danielle Bainbridge at Blue Sky. And if you'd like to reach out to have me on your show, or to have me come give an event, you could always email me at danielle.bainbridge at northwestern.edu.
Yes, people, let's support Miss Danielle Bainbridge, because if you support her, for sure, more and more dandelion will rise. So, I have one more question, Miss Danielle. Ultimately, why the essay? Why not the novel? Why not the poem? Why not the silence? Why can the essay do for a difficult memory that no other form can do?
Yeah, I think in part, essays are condensed, they're concise, they're almost like short stories, but they are generally nonfiction, or true to life. And I think in some ways, what the essay makes possible is experimentation with form. A lot of these essays are very different than what you would think of as traditional prose, but they allow you to kind of play with form and play with content in a way that is almost akin to fiction or short story writing, but tells true narratives. And I think that that's why I decided to go with essays over any other form.
Okay, I'm inviting you to be my guest on Abstract Essay. I think your book is suitable for that podcast. So, people, let's support Miss Daniel again, and for sure, more and more empowering advocacy like this to rise. So, Miss Daniel, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Monica, people, see you soon.